Hello and welcome to our 5-minute CV checklist masterclass. However you choose to lay out your CV, these are the essential elements that you'll need to include. So that includes your contact details. So make sure you've got an up-to-date phone number and email address. And also you don't need to put your full address. You can put just an indication of your location. So for example, the first part of your postcode. You'll need to include a personal profile or a personal summary, which is basically the small paragraph that goes beneath your contact details that sets out your intentions and talks about your top skills. You might want to include a section on your skills that is in a bullet point form, so these will be highlighting the top relevant skills for that role. You'll also need to include an experience section, which will be in reverse chronological order, which means starting with the most recent and working backwards. This will cover things like your job title, where it was, when it was, and what kind of responsibilities the role entailed. You'll also need a section that covers your education and qualifications, which will be similar to the experience section, starting with the most recent and working backwards. Make sure you include which subjects you studied and what your grade was, although you don't have to include grades that you didn't do so well on. So it's fine to omit them, but don't make them up. So we talked about a personal summary, and now I'm going to talk about why it's so important. This is usually the section that makes an employer decide whether to read on or not. So at the top we've got quite a generic sentence that we see a lot of the time. It might be the one on the internet that you see, what is a good first sentence of a CV? But we want to suggest that you write something a bit more similar to the second one. If you remember that the words are precious in a CV and that you need to make them count, this second example is a really good way of showing the employer what your intentions are, how much experience you've got, what kind of things you are good at, and also what you value in a role. When it comes to talking about your skills, you really need to make sure that the skills you're putting on the CV are the skills that the job description is asking for. So when you're reading through a job description, try to be aware of the words that they're using again and again, and this will indicate which skills you need to put emphasis on in your CV. Really try to think about the language that you're using. Make sure it reflects how they've written their job description, and think about your transferable skills. They don't just have to be from work, it might be from volunteering or personal life. If you'd like, definitely check out a skills-based CV layout. There's plenty online, but it offers an alternative way of laying out your CV, which emphasises your skills rather than your experience. This might be really useful for those of you who might not have much experience yet, or for those of you that want to try a completely different industry and want to showcase your transferable skills. So, a little bit about the education section. As I mentioned before, it should start with the most recent and work backwards. It's also not a rule that you have to include the dates of when you graduated. And also it's fine to not include grades that you maybe weren't so proud of, as long as you're not increasing them. As long as it's factual, it's absolutely fine. It's a really good idea at the end of your CV to finish it with a sentence that just reads, "References available on request." And with this in mind, it's probably a good idea to start thinking about who you might want to be your reference, and even better, to ask them in advance. So some thoughts on formatting, especially if your CV is going online. Keep it simple, no fancy fonts. Try not to underline things, as the software that recruiters use see these words are underlined as links to other websites and they don't actually read the word. Don't feel like you have to crowd your CV. You want it to be really readable and accessible. And also, try to save the file with your name in the title so the employer knows straight away who it belongs to. Make sure that you're rereading what you've written, and even better, have someone else check through it because they might spot something that you've missed. We always say it's a really good idea to include important things like languages because they're such valuable skills, so maybe you want to put that in your skills section. And definitely make sure that you're reading the job description thoroughly and make note of the words that they're using again and again and the type of language that they use. We also say it's a really good idea to explain your employment gaps really briefly in your employment history. This way, they won't ask you too much about it when you come to an interview. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next masterclass.